Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Apollo Art Analysis. Today we're going to be looking at a piece from the artist Leah from Kvix Studio. She is actually a German artist working primarily in the medium of AI-generated art. And so in this piece, we're going to be talking about the grand sense of scale and kind of the divinity that results from that. We're going to talk a little bit about textual diversity. We're going to talk about the lone travelers and a cluster of lone travelers. And then we're also going to talk about the space of transition and connect it to the sense of generative surrealism and the movement of AI art currently happening. So let's jump right into it. So in your initial introduction, you're met with this grand sense of scale. And this grand sense of scale is mainly achieved by defining the form of a small subject here. Of course, if a human is only this tall, then you can imagine just how large the scene is here. And so I think that's really important to note whenever you take a look at this work. So that sense of scale almost feels reminiscent of cathedrals and how their design feels incredibly large and incredibly divine, and it kind of dwarfs you as you walk into that. So that grand sense of scale, I think, is incredibly important whenever we're taking a look at this. So in this work, you have the colors ranging everywhere from kind of these darker blues to the black, going to much more lighter blues and even to the eventual whites. So those all really combine almost to reinforce this Arctic setting. I almost think of, say, the aesthetic of Frostbite, or the aesthetic of the kind of destitute decaying of life. And it's hard to say whether this piece is directly negative. I don't think it is, but this kind of drained color palette, I think that reinforces this theme of the Arctic, which has almost little to no life within it. And so within this work, we see a lot of textural diversity, and you see that everywhere from kind of the rough, kind of dusted areas of some of these ice facings all the way to the much more smooth elements deeper within that. And so those all combine to really give a diverse visual experience whenever you're taking a look at this work. And so you see the travelers here, what appears to be 1, 2, 3, even more travelers up there. And each, it's kind of a scattered cluster of travelers, and their forms are all defined through this dark on light contrast. And this really snowy Arctic setting really allows that kind of light neutral backing for that dark color to emphasize the form against that. And so I think that's really important whenever taking a look at this, because it's really unique, because it's kind of a cluster of travelers, but they're kind of scattered. So there's almost this sense of individual perspective on each one as you move throughout the spatial composition. And so you see them moving through this kind of Arctic environment. And the Arctic is a quite a challenging environment at that. Just think about the incredible cold that you would have to go through and just how difficult it is to survive in the Arctic. And so we see them moving through this space of transition, which is actually quite indicative of many literary stories. You kind of have the group of heroes, or the lone hero, moving through a challenging space of transition, or a tumultuous space of transition. And I think the Arctic really reinforces that idea here. You can think of that as the ocean, or the desert, or even the Arctic here as we see before us. And so those all really challenge the lone heroes, or the cluster or group of heroes, to move through the environment, and you're trying to find that oasis or that island or that cave to really kind of find some refuge. And that, of course, is normally in symbolism of a higher goal that you will try and reach. And so we see, I think, is a priceless example of that here. You have that group of travelers moving through the Arctic, and it seems like they've found what they're looking for. It's hard to say exactly whether this is, say, the higher idealized goal that they are finally finding, whether it's their final destination that they have been looking for, or maybe this is actually a mirage or some type of trap, and is just yet another challenge within the vast Arctic, almost like a siren who deceives and calls them within. And so that's what I see within this work. It's hard to say whether this is a super bright and happy piece, or whether it's a really dark piece. And I think it's a mixture of both. And it's really up to the viewer about what they see before them here. And so what do you guys see when you view this work? I'm really curious. Are they finding their final destination? Or is this a trap that's just another challenge within the vast and very destitute, deathly Arctic? So I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think of that. I'm really, really curious. I also want to talk about AI art and the birth of generative surrealism, but also the continuation of generative surrealism. And so we're kind of watching as what I call generative surrealism, which is AI generated art. We're watching as it sheds its subjective roots to create more and more higher resolution forms. And so what that means is whenever you say use something like Night Cafe Studio, which I believe this work was created in, if you want to check that out, just search up Night Cafe Studio. You can make an account and put any text into the generator. It'll create your very own piece of art. It's really, really interesting. And so in the early days of AI generated art, what I saw was a lot of confusing forms. It was really hard to kind of picture or pick out what exactly is happening in front of you there. But nonetheless, we're watching as AI art is getting more and more defined. You know, you have things like DALL-E 2, which are incredibly complex, and then say compared to Night Cafe Studio, it is entirely worlds apart. And we're watching as programs like Night Cafe and Studio and Dream by Wombo, they're kind of shedding their subjective roots and creating more higher resolution forms. And what I mean by that is you're able to kind of see patterns within that a lot more. We see what appears to be people walking around here, and we see what appears to be a large cave entrance as well. And so in the early days of AI art, if you created this prompt, it could be likely that you could get something that you couldn't really even recognize. But now that AI art has just continually developed and evolved and just gained more and more knowledge, I think it's creating more and more higher resolution forms. And so for their human viewers, that results in a higher instances of pattern recognition. And so we'll see how that develops over time, but I think that's really interesting. And we see a unique use of mixed media within the work before us here as well. And if you look in the original description, if you can check out the work, you'll see it's actually an animation. So you see these kind of snow flurries moving across the spatial composition, and that could be mixed media. Say we have the AI art from Night Cafe Studio mixed with something like Adobe After Effects to create that animation. And I think that's really important because it rejects our traditional expectation of a static image in exchange for a much more lifelike visual experience. So that results in a higher level immersion for the viewers, and it really brings you in and kind of adds a much more lively element to the normally kind of subjective and confusing elements of AI art. So I think that the original artist Leah does an incredible job of mixing those two different mediums of, say, the static image alongside the After Effect animation to really bring us into the work and interact with it a bit deeper. So Leah is actually, I believe she works primarily with Night Cafe Studio, and she is actually a German artist from Dresden. And it's quite clear that she has a passion for AI art. She's published a ton on her public profile. So go check that out. Let me know what you guys think. Just a ton of good works coming from this artist, and this is actually the first showcase that we've ever done from her. So this marks her inaugural induction into the halls of the Apollo Art Archive. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. We talked about the divinity through the grand sense of scale. We talked about a little bit of diversity of texture. We talked about the challenging space of transition, whether it's the Arctic, the desert, or the ocean, which the hero travels through and kind of has the challenge to find a higher goal. And then we also connected that to the continual developments of generative surrealism, which is generative art created by AI. And we also talked about the lively sense that's created by mixed media art. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Go check out some of Leah's other works. Like I said, she's doing a bunch of really interesting things. Hope you guys enjoyed. My name is Apollo. This was Apollo Art Analysis, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to support our work directly, please check out our Apollo community tokens. Apollo Art Exchange is an ecosystem of art appreciation which elevates artists each and every day. Thanks for listening.